Hi, welcome back. Today's guest is Dan Miller. Dan is the New York Times bestselling author of 48 Days to the Work You Love, No More Dreaded Mondays, and Wisdom Meets Passion. What Dan really helps people do is think creatively on how they can grow their businesses, how they can grow themselves. Dan has been, let's say, a mentor to me since I discovered his podcast and his books well over 10 years ago. I've been able to go and meet Dan and be on the property he had that was the Sanctuary up in Tennessee a few times for some book launches that friends have had. And Dan is just a great guy to sit down and think about how to be creative and how to approach problems. What we wanted to do was get Dan on and talk about how grandfathers in particular can help maintain that level of creativity and inspiration and wonder that the kids have, and make sure that as grandfathers, we help those grandkids maintain that and think of new and interesting ways to make money, to think about careers, to think about their lives. So it's not all just about money, but it's about being creative and knowing that your situation has multiple different options and multiple different outcomes. And without further ado, let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. This is your host, Greg Payne, coming at you from Studio 12. This podcast is about being the best possible grandpa you can be, focusing on what it is to be a grandpa and how we can all share that experience together for our grandchildren. Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for being on the Cool Grandpa Podcast. I sure do appreciate you taking time out of your day to sit down with us and tell us about your experiences with being a grandfather.
Well, I get a lot of requests for podcasts, but your content, your focus intrigues me. So it was an easy yes.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, this has been just an absolutely a blast talking with other grandfathers and learning about this relationship that sometimes isn't thought about or talked about a whole lot. So this is going to be fun. The first question I ask grandfathers is, what was your reaction the first time you heard the news that you were going to become a grandfather?
Well, Joanne, my wife, and I have thoroughly enjoyed the process of being parents. It's excitement that's never been duplicated in any other way. And so when our oldest announced that he was having one, it was just an expansion of the fun that we knew was to come.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it's a great attitude towards that. I know for different grandfathers have different reactions. I know a little bit with me was I was looking forward to it as well, but there was also a little bit of, hey, wait a second, I'm a little too young to become a grandfather.
Well, I was my own magic number of 48. 48's been pretty much significant to me, and I was 48 years old when our oldest son announced that he and his wife were going to have their first. So everything just fit. It seemed like it was just meant to be.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's awesome. Now, one of the things that I love hearing about you on the podcast that you have is talking every so often about the interactions you have with the grandchildren. And I know the grandchildren don't live just up the street from you, and that they're dispersed throughout the country a little bit. And I wanted to understand a little bit about how do you stay connected with them and how do you use the technology to grow that relationship and maintain it?
All right. Yeah, they are separated geographically, but the world is much smaller than it used to be because of the technology. I remember when I was growing up, I had a cousin who was a missionary in Africa, and we would write letters on that real lightweight paper that would go via airmail, and she'd get it about 6 weeks later. It seems strange now when I can just instantly do FaceTime with my grandkids. So we use FaceTime a lot. Although the kids are separated, even like Joanne, my wife, does art classes with all of our grandkids at various times during the week. So we have grandkids that are in parts of Florida, sometimes in Tennessee, grandkids in San Diego, California, and then some are in Colorado. But the distance just doesn't mean that we can't interact with them. So using FaceTime a lot, we use that. We use Zoom for larger family connections. And then we all travel because we're all entrepreneurs. Nobody's locked into any kind of schedule. So my kids are all entrepreneurs and they have the freedom to come and go. So we see our grandkids more than most people would expect, just by virtue of, we all had them all here just recently, and just close to where we live in Florida. They all came down to Marco Island for a week. So we got to hang out together. So we actually see them fairly frequently.
Wow, and that's great. And I love too that it's an outcome of being an entrepreneur, and for so many of the kids working for themselves or working into positions where they have that flexibility to either travel to you or allow you guys to travel to them, and not locked into, we've got 2 weeks of vacation and we've got to cram a year's worth of, relationships and relationship building into that time period.
When our daughter, we have 3 children, 2 boys and then a girl, when she got married, she married a guy who got a job as a banker. So, he'd come home for lunch on Thursday, and he'd say, hey, I need to get back to the office. She's like, really? Can't we just go to the park and hang out? She was totally unaccustomed to having somebody who had to conform to a schedule, because she grew up with none of that. If we wanted to go somewhere, we went. If we wanted to spend the afternoon at the beach, we did. And certainly I integrated work into that, the work that I've always enjoyed, but our kids never grew up with that 2-week vacation mentality. We did lots of things that were integrated into the normal year.
Oh, that's fantastic. And that's a great goal for folks to have too, as far as thinking, not just in terms of, oh, I want a career or I want a position where I can just take the laptop and go to the Rockies and work. But the idea of, at some point, you're going to have this grandchildren and you're going to have this extended family, and the life that you create for yourself gives you that freedom to go and visit, and then also be able to take those grandkids off on adventures yourself without losing that potential income, where you might need to just spend a couple of hours out of the day working, but then the rest of the time you're free to go for hikes.
Yeah, absolutely. And when Kevin, our oldest, was 10 years old, he started racing BMX bicycles. And then as he got older, he moved into road racing. But he and I would often leave on a Thursday to go somewhere for a weekend racing event, and we'd come back home on Monday. So again, that kind of flexibility is what our kids grew up with. And I see them replicating that now with their own children, where they have the freedom to make those special family occasions happen around work that they do, but not restricted in a normal way.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I was going to ask you about that, is how do you, as a creative thinker and an entrepreneur yourself, start to instill some of that thought process and some of that thinking into the grandkids to, I won't say combat the schools, but a little bit of the general idea with kids is they go off to school, they learn how to sit at a desk, they learn that certain times mean certain activities, but then being able to balance that out with the family life and be able to teach them that there's more to it, and you can be creative in how you generate income or how you spend your time or how you learn even.
Well, that's a great question, Greg. And our daughter, who has a home here in Florida, also in Tennessee, they're actually full-time travelers, have been for over 5 years. So they live on the road. And when you ask those little girls, who's your teacher? Everyone. Where do you go to school? Everywhere. That's how they view it. Everything is an educational experience. And that's how we raised our kids, and the things we instill in our grandkids as well. It's not that education takes place in a classroom when you're sitting quietly in your seat with a book open in front of you. No, experiences teach you. So we value those kind of experiences and create those for our grandkids, where the experience itself becomes a teacher. If we're out in nature somewhere, this morning I sent my grandkids a video of an armadillo that I saw when I was out walking, just walking on. Well, then we learn about that. And if I want to know something about reptiles. I've got a daughter who's really into herpetology. She's our resource for that. We ask her that. Got one who is into crocheting right now, and we help her sell those products to our friends. But they're all involved in ventures where their learning is seamless with their living and their adventures and their vacations, having fun. It's all seamlessly integrated together. And we do a lot to foster that. One of the things that we found invaluable is playing games with our grandkids. We did it with our kids and now with our grandkids. Playing games. Our house is full of games. Joanne and my wife is the master of getting a fun group going on a particular game. We also put together puzzles, which is a great family activity to talk, be doing something together. One of the games we're just fanatic about right now is cash flow, where we're having our kids play that, and what it teaches them about real life, getting out of the rat race, how to get to a position where your ongoing residual income bypasses your fixed expenses. Whether you drew the card to be a mechanic or an airline pilot or a brain surgeon, the goal is you have different levels of fixed expenses, but the goal is to get residual income beyond that. So I have 10-year-old grandkids who are calculating the risk of buying a $300,000 apartment complex as an investment as part of this game, as a way then to leverage income and get out of a normal life. Wow, I mean, the richness of that kind of experience and what it exposes them to. I mean, I've got a 14-year-old granddaughter right now who is very, very creative in the things that she's doing, but rather than just dreaming of getting a car when she's 16, her first financial goal is to buy a house as an investment property that she'll do before she's 16. That just, I mean, the richness of that experience and the integration of having fun and real life excellence, creativity, and is just seamless. There's no drawn line between when they're learning those things and when they're just having fun. It's all one and the same.
Oh, that's fantastic. And it's amazing that your granddaughter's thinking about an investment property versus the car, because I think when I was 16, it was all about that car, and that the thought process was very much what's right in front of me at that age, not what's 2 or 3 steps down the road that may be generating even more income for me.
Yeah, you and me both. But because of their exposure to these games that we play, she understands that already, and she sees that it's much better in the long term, as you say, to buy an investment house than to just spend the money on a car that depreciates.
Now, one of the things, too, that is interesting is that you are essentially creating an environment where the family values are an extension into your son's and your daughter's family, but you have 2 daughter-in-laws and a son-in-law that have been incorporated into this. And so every family unit has some different philosophies, different rules, different values. And even though they may be similar, what are some of the ways that you make sure that you guys are all staying in sync with expectations and ideas about the grandchildren?
Yeah, certainly that is presented as a potential challenging area. In our family, we're fortunate that it really has not been at all. With our kids growing up the way that they did, they seem to find spouses who are very much on the same page. So we haven't found that. I mean, our ideas about education, finances, values, beliefs, and all of that have been pretty clearly just passed along, not in a forceful way, and hopefully we weren't heavy-handed in that, but there's really no difference in the things. I mean, we grew up where one of the things we used, rather than a timeout or punishment, we used what we called attitude adjustments. Comes from old Zig Ziglar teaching, attitude adjustments. So our oldest son, when he was a little kid, when he'd do something that wasn't appropriate, instead of getting his butt whipped, we had him sit down and he'd listen to a Zig Ziglar in that iconic voice talk about stinking thinking and check up from the neck up and those kind of things that we wanted values to be instilled. And then he would write about that. Well, he grew up and didn't have to listen to Dad's positive positive motivational material anymore, but those seeds are planted pretty deep. And all of a sudden, he's got children of his own, and I introduce him to Tom Ziegler, Zig's son. They have a conversation, and my son Kevin is saying, wow, my dad Dan has a podcast. It's just the bomb when it comes to marketing the business. You need to have that for Ziegler. And Tom's like, well, why don't you do it? So now Kevin, this little kid who was forced to listen to Zig Ziglar when he was a little kid, is now the voice of that company. His podcast has been downloaded over 52 million times. He has about 450,000 downloads a month. What a privilege to see a kid grow up who got it. Those were things that we instilled in him as a little kid. And now I hear him passing along those same principles to my grandkids. Same things, the same phrases we used in our house, same little mantras I hear repeated in my grandkids. What a thrill that is. Not just as a pat on my back, but to know they get it. They are learning principles that are going to create the trajectory of their lives because of these things that they're hearing in their own home. And again, it's very much a reflection of what we tried to pass on to them when they were kids. So there hasn't been, some of the things like homeschooling could be a real hot potato. Our kids just naturally expected that. They just saw that as a natural occurrence to take responsibility for their kids' education, to direct that, give their kids these unique opportunities, and in doing so, again, have the flexibility time-wise where the children as well were not locked into hard schedules to prevent family occasions, family events as they came up.
No, that's fantastic. And I know I enjoy listening to Kevin on his podcast on the Ziegler show. And in fact, there was a great story that you had on there. And I think this really shows the influence that grandfathers can have, where you've got a grandson that's moved to Florida, is working in a local hospital, and he's transporting people around. But you had some interesting insights on just how to treat people that you shared with him. And I don't know if you remember the story, but if you do, if you don't mind sharing that with us, I think that's a great example of a grandfather's wisdom.
Wow, Greg, well, I'm honored that you listen and have so many details based on my podcast. My oldest grandson, the one that was born when I was 48, just moved here from Colorado. The change in altitude helped him health-wise dramatically. So he's really thriving here, but got a job immediately at Sarasota Memorial Hospital, a really desirable employer here where we live. And he's a transporter. So seeing that as kind of an entry-level job, and he viewed it as such. Now he does a great job and is well liked there, and he really enjoys the work, but he still saw it as just kind of a beginning job. And I said, I want you to think about the people that you're dealing with, the people that you're wheeling down the hall. I said, being in the hospital is a great equalizer. You bring in homeless people and billionaires. You don't know who it is. They all look the same. They don't have a three-piece suit on or tattered clothes. They all have on a hospital gown. When you're rolling them out the door to their car or down the hall to the lab, just think about who that may be. You don't know who you're going to encounter in that environment. I said, you could have somebody who says, wow, you're a really nice young man. I need somebody. They tell me I shouldn't be driving anymore. I need somebody to just drive my Rolls Royce for me, take me places once in a while. You could live at my house and I'll pay you $2,000 a week to do so. Well, it flipped a switch in his mind. Rather than seeing him as just responsible for doing his job well, all of a sudden he realized this is a connection to opportunities that he may be overlooking that are right there in front of him. I love having those conversations with my grandkids and look for opportunities to do that, just to get them to think differently, to see things differently than what most people do.
Well, and I think that's an important element there too, is the intentionality of looking for areas where you can talk to them and share some wisdom where, like you were saying, it's an entry-level position, but you don't know who you're affecting and who you're talking to. And being able to take that moment and it was probably a simple conversation and didn't take very long, but it was an intentional little piece of wisdom that you were sharing with them that I think a lot of grandfathers need to be mindful of from the standpoint of, we've got little areas and opportunities where we can talk to our grandchildren and even our children and share with them little insights and being creative on how to reframe their projects and their work in a way that can show them great outcomes that could come from it.
We're confronted with so many situations, and rightfully so, but we still can help our grandkids see those situations with eyes that are not common. What are the opportunities here? One of the phrases we use around here a lot is not, oh, gee, that's horrible. This should have never happened. This is unfair. No. What does this make possible? If it's something that was unexpected and even unwelcome, what does this make possible? How can you take advantage of this as an opportunity rather than seeing yourself as victimized by what has happened here? We don't allow certain terminology around here when our children were little, and now passed on to our grandkids. It's, I can't do this, I can't do that. No, we used to just kind of say, are we Americans or are we Americans? Just that little phrase, they remember things like that, and it becomes part of their own thinking. Wow, I'm responsible here. What can I do to see an opportunity here rather than just circumstances that I would not want?
No, absolutely. And I think, too, is that it's important for grandfathers to remember that these impressions and these discussions that we have with their grandchildren are something that's going to last with them for decades. I have had the privilege of interviewing adult children that are in their 50s and 60s, and they clearly remember experiences with their grandfather sitting by a fish pond and conversations that they had about work ethic, or conversations that they had about even decisions about how to ask a girl out, that they were too embarrassed and didn't want to talk to mom or dad about, how should I ask so-and-so out at school? But it's a conversation that they had when they were 10 years old, and now I'm talking to them when they're in their mid-50s and 60s, and they're like, I clearly remember this. So I think it's a great example that you've shared about how grandfather's communication and their influence lasts a lot longer than the end of the week that sometimes people can think about.
This is an area that I really take seriously when we think about legacy. I mean, I've been blessed with books that have done well and different things over the years, where I've been able to interact with a lot of people. But my real measurement of how well I've done is my kids and grandkids. That's a reflection on me, unlike anything else. And I see it as such.
Absolutely. It's interesting too that I think as I've listened to you even talk about careers where at different phases you're focused at different positions and different job growth opportunities, where as adults, as parents and grandparents, there's even those different phases too, where sometimes when we're younger, it's sometimes about collection of material goods, and it's, keeping the score against maybe, and that could be in a positive way. Hey, am I keeping up with somebody that I admire? Am I doing these things? And then there's a subtle shift to being, what is the legacy going to be with my children and grandchildren? Are they set up for success? Have I given them every bit of wisdom that I could so that they can have the opportunities and take advantage of those opportunities that are in front of them?
Yeah, we always included our children in the work that I was doing. I mean, they would hand out flyers when I was doing seminars, when they were 8 and 10 years old. When I had an auto accessories business, they would help with all the details in that. We always included them. So it wasn't just Dad goes off to work. We always included them. And now I do the same thing with my grandkids. Well, I've got one granddaughter who does video editing for me. She's amazing. Papa, is this what you wanted? I'm like, you got to be kidding me. How do you know how to do that? Graphic design. So they all have unique skills, and I try to embrace those and give them opportunities to use those even in what I do. And it's interesting to overhear their conversations a lot of times where, when they grow up, they want to work with Papa. I mean, they want to work with me. And it's interesting in that, my daughter has never had another job. She's worked with me for 18 years now. But what an honor to have kids and now grandkids who want to be connected. It's not like, oh, gee, I have to go see Grandma and Grandpa. No, it's like, oh my gosh, what can I do? What can you show me that I can do to make a few bucks on my own? I mean, those are things too that I really love. I had a granddaughter who just recently, over July 4th weekend, she was at 3 different festivals in her hometown, a little town. This is in Colorado, and she made $1,522 doing henna, which is just the little temporary tattoos that you put on people. $1,522 in 3 days of doing that. Very little cost of materials, obviously. Wow, what a thrill to show them, help them nurture opportunities and things they enjoy, just like I would help an adult. Try to find work that is meaningful, purposeful, and profitable. I do the same thing if it's an 8-year-old. What do you want to do that's meaningful, purposeful, and if you want it to be profitable? I mean, I don't want to be quick to turn everything they enjoy into a money-making endeavor, but a lot of times those opportunities are right there. And I've got grandkids who are doing very well financially because they understand that and are doing things they really enjoy and creating income at the same time.
Well, and I think it's important too to marry up that idea of doing work that you love with money and reward that comes in for that. Meaning, when I was a kid growing up and I wanted money and I wanted things during the summertime, it was get the lawnmower out and go cut some grass,
Sure.
which isn't the worst thing in the world for a young man to be doing. But sometimes in the heat in Virginia, there's some other things that I wish I could have thought about and be a little bit more creative with on how to make some income.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of things that can be done. I have one granddaughter just paid $750 for a snake.
Wow.
Now, the reason is she already knows she can breed it and sell the offspring for $1,000 a piece. So it wasn't just a frivolous expense. She loves snakes. She really enjoys them, learning about them, but she also recognizes there's an economic opportunity connected with that.
Right. The ability to be able to enjoy the snake that you have, do some breeding, and then be able to make a few $1,000s every time the eggs hatch is fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some comparisons that maybe you make between when you were a kid and dealing with grandparents or people of your grandparents' generation and now, where maybe there are some things that you want to pass on? Meaning, what were some of the activities and relationships and things when you were younger that you took in and were like, man, I really enjoy this, and maybe are purposeful in passing along similar situations or similar discussions with your grandchildren?
Well, it's a very fair question, and I have a background that doesn't really lend itself to bringing a lot forward in that. I grew up where I never met any of my grandparents except my grandfather. They say I met one time when I was like 3 years old, but I don't remember that. But they lived a long distance away geographically. And of course, we didn't have the kind of connections that we do today. So I never grew up with them, never experienced being around them at all, zero. And then in my own home, my dad's view of life was pretty stern theologically. We're just here to be responsible. There's not a lot of fun. So we didn't have the things that I'm talking about. We didn't have game times, fun times, vacation times. It was all just being responsible, do work, and go to work, go to church twice on Sunday and once on Wednesday. That was it. So it's been a process of exploration for my wife and I to learn these things, learn how to build these practices and principles and pass them on. Because we started with pretty much a blank slate. So I don't have a lot of traditions to draw from. Now, certainly we've observed and asked for mentors along the way and seen other people who are doing these things well, just one of the methods for learning ourselves. A lot of it has just been experimenting and with not a lot of history to draw from, but just seeing what things were fun for us and what things really instilled in our children, the principles we wanted, and now seeing them pass that on to their grandkids. So, yeah, wish I had memories there, but I just don't. That's an area of my life that it really did not exist.
No, and that's fair, because I know not everybody has these relationships with their grandfathers or grandparents or grandmothers. And so sometimes we're out here and we're trying to figure it out, a little bit like parenting at times. We're trying to figure these things out and figure out these roles. And I love the idea that you had about getting mentors. And I think that's something too that grandparents can do, is certainly amongst other grandfathers. If you didn't have a relationship with your grandfather, didn't have a positive one that you could model that relationship off of, is using mentors and using friends to help figure out what should that relationship look like. And that's part of the reason we're having this conversation, is I want to know for myself and with my grandkids, how do I install with them to be creative thinkers, and how do I get them to think differently? And so that's one of the reasons I enjoy talking with you about this, is I'm learning, what I need to be doing.
I had a question from a 16-year-old last week who said he had just read 48 Days, and he said he was terrified as a result of reading it because he grew up always dreaming of being a soccer player. But he knew realistically that would never happen. With his background, his economic status and all that, that would never happen. Now he's 16 years old. And he said, then he read 48 Days to the Work You Love, and he's like, is it really possible? Again, I opened up the door of possibility there. I love having that opportunity with somebody who's 16 years old. The old saying, ignorance is bliss. If you don't know that there's a bigger opportunity that's available to you, you can be content with mediocrity. And a lot of adults kind of fall in that category. But here's a 16-year-old says, are you telling me it might be a possibility for me? Wow. And I can relate on my own son, advanced in bicycle racing. I mean, we were really up the ladder in that while my son was growing up. But I love having the opportunity. I'm involved in some entrepreneurial programs for high schoolers right now as well, where I just have the opportunity to speak into them, not to make them all raving entrepreneurs, that's not the goal at all, but to help them recognize the broad spectrum of opportunities of things they can be involved in when they really understand themselves well, recognize their own unique talents and passions, and the possibilities that come as a result of that. So it's an extension, of grandparenting my own. I don't want to be selfish in that, but I value and I'm honored with the opportunity to speak to those who are in that same age category.
Absolutely. And it's one of the things too, is I've had other people on that don't have grandkids, that they don't have families, but these men enjoy working with young men and mentoring them, whether it's a wood shop or with scouts or whatever that program is. And I think it's one of those things where if you've had that positivity and you've had some life lessons, that you can turn around and you can pour into other people, boys or girls, doesn't matter, but be able to share that with them to give people a broader sense of what that world and what the possibilities are that are out there.
Oh, absolutely. Now, one of the things that I really value, which is no surprise to you, I'm sure, is reading. I mean, reading was my way to get a window into a bigger world than just growing up on the farm. And so I pass that along to my grandkids, the value of reading and the books that have the possibility to change your life. There are 5 books that I recommend that all my grandkids read by the time they're 13 years old. And may seem like some of them are kind of a stretch, but it lays those principles in there to get them to start to think in ways that their peers are probably not exposed to. I'm going through with a large online community right now, a 1-year study of Think and Grow Rich. And it amazes me to encounter people who are 50 years old who have never read that book. It's just such a foundational book for stretching your thinking. It's not just about being rich financially. That's really not talked about very much, but how to live a rich life in so many areas. But I really encourage any way that I can my grandchildren to read. I love sitting and helping them when they're just starting to learn to read. But even in that process, choosing books that are going to stretch their thinking a little bit, rather than just reading about Dick and Jane running up the hill. If you read books that kind of give them exposure into, wow, I was drawn to books like the old Horatio Alger stories when I was a kid, Rags to Riches. Those were the ones I was drawn to like a moth to the light. So in helping my grandkids read the right kind of material, wow, they start thinking in different ways.
Could you share with us those 5 books?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, those books are How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I mean, that's one that I want them to go back and reread. I mean, that can make such a difference. I mean, we see kids out here, you go somewhere and you get a sandwich and you say thank you and it's, hey, no problem, dude. I mean, how rude is that? I mean, How to Win Friends and Influence People, you're going to learn just simple respect that'll elevate you in opportunities immediately. Another one is See You at the Top, Zig Ziglar, where he has all those stories about attitude and how you can advance even if your circumstances don't seem to indicate it. And then Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill, just kind of a standard. There's updated versions with updated anecdotes in that. I like the original version back in the old language that he used in 1937, but that's certainly one. And then The Magic of Thinking Big, the importance of remembering people's names, how to walk a little bit faster than others, how to, shake hands. And then the last one would be Acres of Diamonds by Russell Conwell, how to recognize opportunities that are right under your nose. So again, How to Win Friends and Influence People, See You at the Top, Think and Grow Rich, The Magic of Thinking Big, and Acres of Diamonds. Those will put a person, whether they're 8 or 80, on a different path of life than what most people are on.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And I'll be sure to put a list of those books and even some links over to Amazon as well to make it easy for folks to click over there and get a hold of a book. So,
awesome.
As we start to wrap up, what advice would you have for grandfathers to go through and start to instill some of this creativity? I know we've talked a little bit about games and we've talked about books, but are there any other areas where you could suggest to grandfathers to spark that creativity of thought in their grandchildren?
One of the things is to find the child's area of interest rather than just trying to pull them into your own. I mean, there's a lot of grandpas who take their kids, fishing, and the kids are bored out of their mind. Now, I'm sure that some it connects with, but be careful about just trying to pull them into your world. The real connection point is going to be when you understand what are they interested in, and then join them in doing that. So if it's music, go to concerts together. If it's woodworking, do that. If it's fishing, that's fine. If it's sports, do that. But kids are very different, and that would be one thing, to just find their area of interest and allow them to be excellent there. There's a verse in Proverbs 22:6, where it says, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, not depart from it. Well, that's been misused a lot by well-meaning parents and grandparents, thinking, well, if I just, force this kid to do these things, then they're going to grow up with these same kind of beliefs and values I have. A really more accurate rendering of that verse in the original script is train up a child in the way that he or she is bent. So the challenge as parents and grandparents is, how is this child bent? What are they interested in? How are they talented? Are they introverted and shy? Don't force them to be other than that. Are they interested in music? Okay, then let's go there. So it's that. I mean, it takes a little more time, but you can't cookie cutter interaction with grandkids. You've got to find their individual likes if you're really going to connect with them.
Oh, absolutely. And that's great advice. Is we can't treat everybody the same, because they certainly aren't. Even in grandkids coming from the same set of parents, they're going to be vastly different sometimes.
Yep.
Is there anything else about grandparenting or that you would like to talk about that maybe we haven't touched on?
I'm sure I'll think of something 5 minutes after we stop, Greg. But we've covered a lot. I mean, I love the topic. It's an ongoing thing. It's not something you just kind of package and have it over with. I learn things every day in being a grandparent from my grandkids. That's another thing I think that's really important. I expect to learn from my grandkids. This is not just a one-directional kind of thing. And what they know today, how they can do research and get information, and the things that they come up with that they are interested in that surprise me, like your granddaughter interested in herpetology. I've never been extremely attracted to alligators and lizards, but she is. And so I'm going to go there with her because that right now is an area of interest of hers. So Yeah, I can't think of anything that we haven't kind of touched on here, but it's such a rich, open-ended opportunity as a grandparent.
Oh, it is. And so as we wrap up, Dan, I just want to say thank you again for being on the show and taking time out of your day to talk with us about how to get these kids thinking a little bit different and inspire that creativity within them.
Oh, what an opportunity. Well, it's an opportunity to talk to you, Greg. I love what you're doing. Love the focus of your podcast and enjoy our conversation.
Thank you. Wow, what a great conversation with Dan. I really enjoyed listening to how he is helping his grandchildren learn about life and maintain that creativity. You know, the idea that the grandkids where, you know, their school is everywhere and their teacher is everybody. And this idea that they're always looking and exploring and trying new things to not just earn money for earning money, but doing things in service and thinking of ways that they can build for their futures, right? What I want you guys to do is be sure to check out the show notes. I've got links to Dan's website, 48days.com. I've got links to the 48 Days community. I have links to those 5 books that Dan had talked about. And I've got some other links and things that are helpful in the show notes. So the show notes are located at www.cool-grandpa.us. So go there, check out those links. And then I really encourage you to look at Dan Miller's, all the resources that he has. He has a number of free resources, especially if you're a grandpa or somebody that is looking to make a career change, but you're not sure what you want to do. Check out Dan's resources. I really encourage you to do that because that will help you think creatively, not just for yourself, but will also give you tools that you can then use with your grandkids. Until next time, remember to stay cool. Thank you for listening to the Cool Grandpa Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and share it with a friend. That's the best way you can help us to expand our community, as well as get the news out about how valuable grandpas are in the lives of those kids. If you'd like to leave me a comment or shoot me a potential topic for this podcast, please go to www.cool-grandpa.us. Look for the comments tab, fill it out, hit submit. It's as easy as that. Until next time, remember to stay cool.